Welcome to Gridiron Central. It's the start of our 7th season covering high school football in Northwest Georgia. Beside me, as always, Matt Davis, the voice of football on 95.7 The Ridge. There we go. Got an explosion added to the fist bump this year. Hopefully we'll be that explosive. I'm your host, Jim Alred, and we have a whole lot of football to talk about. 3 teams did begin their season last Friday. We may mention those later on, but everyone else begins their season this Friday. A whole slew of games to talk about. We begin in Bartow County, where Adairsville is traveling to play Cass. This is a rematch of last year's season opener, where Cass upset the Tigers 33-27. Of course, Adairsville went on to have quite a good season in Region 5 AAA, made the playoffs. Very, very good offense last year. Solid special teams last year. Defense kind of allowed a lot of points. Adairsville, in their preseason win over Dalton, Adairsville's coach said, look, we really worked on our defense. It showed off in the preseason win over Dalton. We'll see if it will show off against Cass. Offense is going to score a lot of points. Special teams is going to be great. If that Adairsville defense can really tighten up and do well, watch for them to have an 8-2, 9-1 season, possibly in 5 AAA. Cass, again, won 3 or 4 games to start last season, kind of fell off toward the end of the season. Not traditionally a football power. A lot of people around the community think they might be better this year. I'm probably going to agree with that, but I think Adairsville's better than Cass. I'm going with the Tigers in this one. What about you, Matt?
This one was a very hard one for me to pick, and I've had the pleasure of calling some Adairsville games over the last couple of years, and they've been one of the teams from the area that I've been most impressed with. And one of the reasons for that is their quarterback, Marcus Childers, who even as a young quarterback had some success early, and he brings that success to this season. So I think that's a huge advantage for them, especially in a situation where they've got a brand new head coach. Coach Kramer is no longer there. Eric Bishop steps in, and that's always a challenge, getting used to a new coach and going into some new things in that situation. So maybe there's some challenges that lie there. I don't know. I know that a couple of the receivers that were there last year that were favorite targets for Marcus Childers are no longer there. That could have potentially affect the way they play. And then also, like you mentioned, ramping up that defense is another key. So I do think Adairsville is going to have a strong offense. I think this might be kind of a repeat of what we had last year. I don't know a whole lot about Cass other than the fact that a couple of years ago, I think they lost every game. And then last year they had a lot more success, and they've been building this program. And I ran into a guy yesterday that's really close to one of our local programs, and he was telling me that Cass is really going to be a team to watch this year. So it's kind of hard for me to go on that without more particular details on this. So part of me wants to lean towards Adairsville, but now it's in my head what he said about Cass. So I'm going to have to make a split-second decision on this. I'm going to go with Adairsville. I had circled Cass in this game, but being that I've seen Adairsville, I know what they're capable of. It would not surprise me if they won this game, so I'm going to stick with Adairsville.
Well, you picked the right one because Adairsville's going to win.
But then I shouldn't have gone on anything you said because you've won the Rick Award the last couple of years.
Well, you know what? No, I've won it once.
Once, okay, once.
Once. And the reason I won it is because I couldn't pick Shorter's games. For those unfamiliar with the Rick Award, it goes to the worst picker on the radio show. What is it called? The Friday Night Radio Show?
This Week in Northwest Georgia
This Week
Football.
in Northwest Georgia Football that Matt and I are also on. We have to pick the Shorter games, and every time I picked Shorter to win last year, guess what? They lost. Every time I picked them to lose, they won. Shorter hates me. You know how it is. If not for that, I most definitely wouldn't have gotten the award. Moving on, Armurchie at Tryon, a rematch of last year's season opening game where the Bulldogs laid a beat down on the Indians. I was there covering that game. I think I'd actually picked Armurchie to win that one. I was dead wrong in that one. Tryon won that one 34-3 last season. Of course, Armurchie won 1 game in 2012. That was against Murray County, who hasn't won in about 3 or 4 years, although they did play close against Model and a couple of other teams. Tryon, of course, went on to the single-A public school state playoffs, losing in the second round, had a pretty successful season. Obviously, Armurchie, I think the Indians are going to be better than they were last year. Tryon, I think they're going to be about the same, if not a little bit better themselves. That being said, Armurchie is going to lose this game, but I think it's going to be closer than it was last year. Matt?
Yeah, I had the opportunity just before the season begins to talk to all the coaches for the area teams, particularly in 7AA, and I sat down with Preston Cash for about 30 minutes last week, and the word that I kept hearing over and over in our conversation was sophomore, sophomore, sophomore. Yes. Armurchie was a young team last year. They're still young this year, and one of the big things that happened during the offseason for them that I think adds another question mark to their team going into the season is their starting quarterback, which would be a senior this year, bringing that senior leadership in, Jacob Farmer, had a season-ending injury. Yeah. I believe he's going to have surgery unless I'm mistaken. So I think even though he didn't have a great year in the offense from Almerchi, had a tough year last year, I think he was going to bring a lot of leadership and experience into this year, and I think that they would have been improved. Now they've got a couple of quarterbacks that they're going to be shifting in and out from what I understand, and I'm not really sure about those guys because I've not seen them play in that position that much. So I think there are a lot of question marks for Almerchi. I agree with you. I think in a lot of ways they will have matured and improved, but how do they adjust to a new quarterback going into this young season? I think it's going to take some time for them to get their legs underneath them and to hit the ground running. Whereas, as you mentioned already, Tryon, I tell you, man, I picked against them in some games last year, and they shocked me. You know, they've got some talent on this team, and I think they're going to hit the ground running this year. So I'm going to pick Tryon in this game. I think that's a very, very safe pick.
Yeah, I think so too. And Almerchi is one of those teams where I think there's a lot of parity in 7AA this year when you look at spots 2 through 7, whatever it is. But definitely those 2, 3, and 4 spots. Now, granted, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Calhoun up here, everybody else probably below the table. But anyway, there's a lot of parity there. I'm not so sure who your 2, 3, and 4 seeds that will also go to the playoffs are. I think if Almerchi gets hot, most of the region games come in the latter part of the season. They're a young team, a lot of player experience last year. They could make a run late. Speaking of the best team in Region 7AA, possibly one of the best in all of AA, Calhoun travels to play Ridgeland in what is an interesting game in that it's the first time in Gridiron Central that we can talk about 2 local teams having both made the state finals the previous year. Calhoun, of course, was the runner-up in 7AA. Ridgeland was the runner-up in 4A, excuse me. Calhoun last year beat Ridgeland 42-35. That was in Calhoun. This one's in Ridgeland, where it's an awful tough place to play. One thing to note, Ridgeland's only beaten Calhoun once. That came back in 1989. Of course, Ridgeland, I think, opened in the 80s, so it's not like they've been around that long. And, of course, it's Calhoun, so it's obligatory that I have to mention the Yellow Jackets haven't lost a regular season game since 2008. 47 straight regular season wins. Make it 48. I don't care if they have to go to Ridgeland. I don't care if they play this on the moon. Calhoun's going to beat Ridgeland. Ridgeland lost a lot off of last year's team. They're still going to be a solid team. Calhoun lost a lot, but Calhoun just reloads every single year. Watch for Calhoun. They will make a run deep in the playoffs. I think Ridgeland will too. That being said, I will mention this. Go ahead and say it now, Calhoun fans. 2 weeks from now, you lose. Carrollton's going to end that regular season winning streak. Write it down. I said it. Hopefully I said it first, but we'll see. Matt, what do you think?
You know, I think Calhoun's going to win this game. You mentioned the word reload, and when you talk to coaches, you talk to fans, you talk to anybody about Calhoun, that's the word you most commonly hear, and they do it every year. And I want to mention a few names: Taylor Lamb, Landon Curtis, Nash Nance. You know, this year they're going to have a new quarterback. Do you know his name?
You know what? I do, but it just escaped me at the moment. But, I mean, he played extremely well against Rome in the preseason game.
They find players and they make the best of their situations. And I think a lot of that comes down to coaching. The coach is still the same, and they've got a great program up there. I know they've got a new Jumbotron that they're going to unveil here in a couple of weeks, which is kind of interesting. None of our local area teams have that.
Rome
I know.
does.
Well, Rome,
Barron,
of course, at Barron
Barron
Stadium. And I know some other high schools in the state do have that, but it's still a fairly new thing to our area, which I know is really exciting and just creates even more excitement at a place that already has tremendous atmosphere that we talk about every year for high school football. So they know how to run a program, and they're going to be, you know, moving forward as much as a team that's been to the state championship 5 years in a row can continue to move forward despite losing last year in a pretty disappointing game to Jefferson. They're going to be a good football team. You know, Ridgeland loses Von Bell, some other players. They had a disappointing end of the season in the finals there at the Dome. You and I were both there, and it was really just a brutal game to watch. And one of the things that's disappointing to watch about Ridgeland is the one-dimensional style of play in terms of their offense. And I think that's what's going to kill them against a team like Calhoun that has so many different things they can do on the football field in terms of offense and also a great defense. So I'm going with Calhoun. I feel very safe in that pick.
Gotcha. We're both in agreement on that. I think so far we're agreeing all the way down. Rockmart.
That's scary.
At Cedartown. Well, you're agreeing with me, so you're going to be right. Rockmart at Cedartown, the battle for Polk County. Cedartown last year kind of laid it all over Rockmart, 40-14. Last 5 meetings between the two, Bulldogs have a 4-1 record against the Jackets. One of those wins was in overtime. But that being said, Rockmart last year advanced to the playoffs, winning their first playoff game since the late 1980s. Good news for Rockmart, they won a playoff game last year. Bad news, they lost practically the entire farm. Cedartown, of course, brings back Nick Chubb, one of the most talked about running backs, if not in the state, if not in the nation,
country,
definitely in the state, in the Southeast, already committed to play football at Georgia.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he committed, whatever. Unfortunately, he produced 82% of the offense for Cedartown last year. You cannot have those numbers this year for Cedartown to do well. Cedartown's defense is going to have to get better. Offense is going to have to get better around Nick Chubb. But that being said, I think it's going to happen in this game. I don't see a problem. I think Cedartown probably wins big.
I agree. I mean, there's two things in this game that stick out like a sore thumb. You already mentioned Nick Chubb. He was so exciting to watch last year and just to read about in the newspaper, all the exciting things he did. And then as a Dog fan, it was also just tremendous to hear that he was committing to Georgia because everybody wanted a piece of Nick Chubb. And one of the things I really like about him, aside from the fact that he's a great football player, I understand he's a really good kid and he's smart. Yes. And I think that's one of the things that Georgia really needs on their team. I don't want another running back for the Georgia Bulldogs that you're going to read about in the newspaper for doing something knuckleheaded.
Isaiah Crowell comes to mind.
Yeah, Washaun Ely. I mean, you can name several. So this is a good thing for them. But we're talking high school here. He's going to rack up the yards in this game. Yeah. He absolutely is. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, I mentioned two things. The second is going to be youth. Rockmart's a young team. It seemed like Kwame Peak was there for like a decade, even though he wasn't.
4 years, but he was a
like
substantial
forever.
Player for 4 years.
And I just mentioned him because he was one of their key components to success, and that's just one example of the great players they lost. They're going to have some athletes, but it's going to take them a little while to get their legs underneath them. So I'm going to go with Cedartown in this game. I think it's going to be a whole lot of Chubb.
Gotcha. And right after this, we're heading commercial right now. Right after this, we'll talk about another 4 games.
Begin your future at Georgia Northwestern Technical College. We offer degrees, diplomas, and certificates in over 200 programs of study. Choose a career in business, health, industrial, or public service. With the flexibility of day, evening, and online classes at any of our 5 campus locations, getting your education at GNTC has never been more convenient. There are many financial aid options available, including student loans. Apply now. Georgia Northwestern Technical College. Your college, your town, your future.
Welcome back to the show. We always like to thank our sponsors. This year, Georgia Northwestern Technical College is helping bring Gridiron Central to you. We have an Emmy-nominated show, an Epi-nominated show, the longest-running newspaper-produced high school football show in the state of Georgia. Back to the games Friday night, a team that didn't have much success in 2012. The Sonoraville Phoenix travels to Pickens County. The Phoenix were 1-9 in 2012. Their one win coming against Model. I actually covered that game. Last year, Sonoraville lost to Pickens 50-21. Pickens finished the year 5-5 in 2012, just missing the playoffs in Class 4A. I think Sonoraville is going to be a better team, but I'm not so sure you're going to see more than about another 3 or 4 wins from the Phoenix this season. Pickens, I think, is a better team in a higher classification. I'm going to go with Pickens County in this one.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to look at the teams from last year and you were going to give a most improved award, I definitely think Pickens would be on that list of people that you would think about because I believe the year before that they only won a single game and the team they beat, I don't remember who it was, but if memory serves me correct.
It might have been Murray County.
Yeah, that team didn't win a game or whatever the case may be. So, they're a team that really improved, and assuming that they have a lot of their unit back that they had the previous year, I would think that, the more leadership they get and experience, they're going to continue to improve. Sonoraville, they've got some struggles, I think, headed their way this year. So I'm going to go with Pickens in this game as well.
Gotcha. Chattooga traveling to play East Hall. The Indians last year only won 2 games in 2012. Those wins came against Murray County and Armurchie. Last year, they only lost 29-21 to East Hall. East Hall, not a bad team, not a great team. The Indians have 17 starters returning from last year. That's the good news.
Yeah, absolutely.
The bad news is those 17 starters only won 2 games. Another year under their belts, should be better. A lot of enthusiasm in Chattooga, thinking they have the athletes, they have a team that could be pretty good. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go with East Hall in this game. I think that Chattooga is getting close, but they're not quite there yet. Again, it's a non-region game. It really doesn't affect the region standings. Chattooga is one of those teams you got to really watch out for in the 7AA race because I think all of the teams, other than Calhoun and possibly Murray County, who will be at the bottom, are very equal. And we're going to see over the next 5 to 6 weeks which teams emerge to get into that race. In this game, I think East Hall is going to win. What do you think, Matt?
There's going to be a recurring theme in some of the games in 7AA because I think that there's some teams here that have some talent and also, like you mentioned, have some experience coming back. but will also take a little bit of time to get things rolling in the right direction. Chattooga is one of those teams for me. They've got Nigel Dickerson coming back, and he was a great quarterback for them last year.
Yes.
And I know they lose, unless I'm mistaken, one of their backs, Ronell Sims, that was with them for a while, and he was a good player. But they've got a lot of talent coming back. They're going to win some games this year. They're going to win more than 2 games. I'll go ahead and make that prediction. But I think they get a slow start. So I'm going to go with East Hall in this game as well. That was one of those ones that I didn't have circled until I just came in here, man. I'm not 100% certain on that one, but I'm gonna stick with East Hall.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a game too, and I'll go back to that one. That's a game. I'm not 100% on that game. I think it could go either way. I'm just going to go with East Hall. They won it last year. They're a higher classification school. They have more coming back. Gordon Central at Coosa. Last year, this game was a blowout. Gordon Central waxed the Eagles 35-0. Of course, if you remember, Coosa lost the first 5 games to open the 2012 campaign, then won 4 of their next 5 to get into the AA playoffs. Really got better as the season went on. Gordon Central only had 2 losses in the regular season last year and then lost in the first round of the AAA state playoffs. Warriors had a lot of talent last year. Unfortunately, a lot of that talent was seniors and graduated. Coosa, new head coach. And I look at all this, and I like Coosa. I think this is a team. I saw them at 7-on-7 at Darlington, and of course I know you can't take everything from 7-on-7, but I think Coosa can run the ball. I think they can pass. I think the defense is going to be there. I'm not 100% sure about special teams. I'm actually going to be on the sidelines covering this game because I think it's a statement game. I think it's a statement game for either one of these teams, both with new head coaches. Gordon Central wants to prove there's not going to be as much fall off as most people think there's going to be. Coosa, on the other hand, wants to prove that, hey, we really did get a lot better in the second half of 2012. We're going to carry that over and show you what we can do in 2013. I think Coosa's going to win this game. It's at Coosa. They have a lot more coming back than Gordon Central does. I think it's a good statement game for Coosa here. They get the win. What do you think, Matt?
Very interesting situation that Todd Wheeler inherits going into the year, and that's 3 AAA teams right off the bat to start the season. And, very tough start to the season last year, lost 5 straight. They don't want to do that again this year. They really had to overcome a lot. I think that showed a lot of maturity as the season went on for them. But again, some of the games that they won were against teams that were kind of struggling. And so, this year they want to make a statement. And I think Coosa has got the talent to make a statement. I think they have the last several years, and a lot of people would agree with me on that. But it's kind of interesting. When you ask people in the know about Coosa what they think about the season coming up, I had somebody tell me this yesterday. They'll either go 9-1 or they'll go 1-9. They know they've got the talent. It's just a matter of how they perform when they get out on the field. And I think it's a really positive thing that now they've got Todd Wheeler at the helm because he knows what it's like to be a leader. I mean, heck, he was a captain for Vince Dooley's Dogs. And he has a lot of experience in football, and he's a real respectable guy. And I think that the kids are really going to respond to him. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what he's done with his team in the offseason. I think he's cautiously optimistic going into the year, and I think that's a pretty safe way to approach it. You can't put too much stock in these first 3 games because in 7AA, I look at it as the first few games, the non-region games, are kind of like a preseason. You care about winning, but at the end of the day, it really starts to matter when you get into the region. They got to learn from these few games, and that's the approach they've got to take. They got to try to win the games, but they've got to be moving forward every step of the way. I'm going to go with Coosa in this game. I think Gordon Central lost so much that they're going to be in a situation where they're really trying to get their legs underneath them a lot more than Coosa is because Coosa, they got a new quarterback situation, but they got a lot of guys returning, and I think they're going to be tough as nails this year, so I'm going with Coosa.
Yeah, I like Coosa as my dark horse in 7AA this year. I said this back in the spring, Gridiron Central, as we wrapped up everything, and I'm going to say it again now. I'm not so certain that Coosa's not going to be your number 2 seed coming out of Region 7AA. I know that means they're going to have to beat Pepperell, but we'll talk about that in a few weeks. But and also, unless I'm about even saying, I think Coosa, 4 of their first 5 opponents, playoff teams from 2012. Now, a couple of those lost a lot of people, so we're going to know pretty early about how good Coosa is. Moving on to 2 teams, and one team we know how good they are. Another one is looking awfully good after a big win last week. Cartersville travels to play Darlington. Okay, let's go back. Hurricanes beat Darlington 28-7 in 2012. Cartersville only lost 1 game last year. That was in the AAA semifinals to a team named Buford. Buford went on to win the state finals. Key thing about that game, Cartersville took a lead going late into the 3rd quarter. Buford had 2 interceptions of quarterback Barden. Those turned into points. Buford ended up getting the close win in that one. I'm not so sure Cartersville wasn't the 2nd best team in AAA last year. Cartersville returns the farm. Practically everybody is back. They are going to be good. Of course, Darlington last week laid it all on Murphy, North Carolina. I was at that game. I was very surprised. Very opportunistic defense on the side of Darlington. Kicking game looked solid, but here's the whole thing in this. Darlington is a pretty good single A team.
Sure.
Probably in the top 20 in single A, I would say. Cartersville's probably the third or fourth best team in all of AAA. Darlington's beaten Cartersville once in the last 15 meetings. They came close a couple of years ago when Cartersville was a little bit down. Tommy Atha, when he schedules this game, knows he wants the Darlington Tigers to compete. Yeah, they love to win, and they want to win, and they're going to go out there and try to win, but they're not going to. Cartersville wins this game, and it might be ugly.
I agree with you on this game. When I look at the matchup, Darlington, yes, they had great success last week, but I know that the quarterback for Murphy, North Carolina, despite the fact that the year before that team had gone on and I believe was a semifinal or made it to the finals. Yeah, made it to the finals. They, they just could not get their legs underneath them in that game, and a lot of that does have to do with Darlington's defense.
Yeah,
I mean,
very opportunistic defense.
Yeah, absolutely. The first drive of the game, Darlington scores pretty quick on a bunch of run plays. Very first offensive play for Murphy, North Carolina, interception, ran back for a touchdown. They punched him in the mouth, and Murphy, North Carolina never could recover from that.
Well, not to mention their third offensive series ended in a scoop and score for Darlington as well. You're down 21-0, 4 minutes into the game. Very hard to recover from that.
Most definitely. And so from Darlington's standpoint, one of the things that always impresses me about Tommy Atha and his coaching staff is that they take what they have and they squeeze every drop out of it. They get the most out of their players, and that's very impressive. But no matter what they get out of these kids in this game, I hate to say this, but Cartersville is just going to have too much depth. They're a bigger school. They have more players. They've got a lot of talent. All their players are coming back. They are a really, really good team. Maybe Darlington makes it interesting in the first quarter, but I'm with you on this one. I think this one goes south. I think that Darlington could possibly take it on the chin in this game, but they're going to learn a lot from it, and that's the reason why Tommy Atha schedules these games. And then by the time you get to your region schedule, you've gone up, up against tougher opponents than you're probably going to face. So I think that's a good philosophy, and I think it's going to serve them well, especially breaking in a new quarterback. We got to talk about the big elephant in the room. Everybody's going to talk about what is life like after Brad Butler. You can't ignore that. But I think Logan Rice made a statement last week that Darlington moves on past Brad Butler, and he's going to do a good, solid job for them this year. So I think there's going to be some good things ahead for Darlington.
Although I will note that he will probably have to throw more than 2 passes.
That's a good point. It's going to be a different kind of team without him, but there is going to be life without Brad Butler this year, I think.
4 more games to talk about after this commercial break from our sponsor, Georgia Northwestern Technical College.
Begin your future at Georgia Northwestern Technical College. We offer degrees, diplomas, and certificates in over 200 programs of study. Choose a career in business, health, industrial, or public service. With the flexibility of day, evening, and online classes at any of our 5 campus locations, getting your education at GNTC has never been more convenient. There are many financial aid options available, including student loans. Apply now. Georgia Northwestern Technical College. Your college, your town, your future.
Welcome back to Gridiron Central, Emmy-nominated show, Epi-nominated show, the longest-running newspaper-produced high school football show in the state of Georgia. We always like to thank our sponsor, Georgia Northwestern Technical College. And now on to even more games. We have 4 more games remaining to talk about. We start as Model travels to Christian Heritage. Of course, the Blue Devils were the feel-good story of 2012, first winning season in a long time, the first playoffs, and an even longer time. Of course, they lost in the first round of the playoffs, but they got there. That was a key thing. The Blue Devils do return an awful lot of talent. Christian Heritage lost to Model 40-16 last year. Heritage finished the season 5-5, but late in the season had a very close loss to Darlington, had a very close loss to Tryon, both playoff teams. So Christian Heritage is no slouch. Model returns a lot of talent on this team. They do lose Alfred, the big offensive lineman. VJ Saxon, who's really starting to come into his own at linebacker, is not playing football this fall, so they lose him too. I think those are 2 huge losses for the Blue Devils. However, I think they'll be good enough to beat Christian Heritage. And Model's one of those teams, a lot of people are thinking, hey, these guys can challenge for that number 2 spot. I'm going to agree with you. I think they can. I'm not so sure they will, but I think they can. Of course, Model would love to get in the playoffs for the 2nd consecutive year, have another winning season. We'll see. I say they beat Christian Heritage. What about you, Matt?
This is a very interesting game to me, and one of the things I want to mention about Model, I think this is one of the most important seasons that they've ever had in terms of their football program there, because they had success last year. Now they need to prove that they can have continued success, because they had so many years that were so tough, and you could really feel every year that they were starting to build some momentum and getting better and getting better and getting better. And then last year they had some major progress, went 6-5, had a winning record for the first time in a long time, made the playoffs, struggled once they got there, but they moved forward. Yes. They've got to continue to move forward this year. They cannot take a step back, because one of the things I noticed, and I know you've been to some Model games last year, was that from the first of the season to the end, you could see a shift in the way people were reacting to the team and getting behind them. The crowds got bigger, they got louder, they got more excited. It was more of a football atmosphere that you want to see. And that was not by accident. This has been something they've been moving towards for several years. They got new uniforms, they got a new weight room, they got new equipment. They've been doing everything they can to get people behind this program. And there's nothing that gets people behind a program more than winning football games. So they've got to have a successful season this year. They start off on a good foot, I think, in this game. I think they're going to beat Christian Heritage. One of the things I like about Model, at least what I'm being told about them, last year they started to try to spread some things out. They didn't have much success there. They had to work with their personnel, and they ended up being primarily a run team. They'll primarily be a run team again this year, but I think they're going to be more of a pass threat, because I think Cameron O'Neal at quarterback is going to have more confidence going into that. Yeah. He's got some good wide receivers led by James Brown, which I love it when he does good things in the game, because it gives me ample opportunity to make Godfather of Soul James Brown references, so we'll be waiting on that. I think they're going to be more dynamic in terms of their offense, and I think their defense is also going to be improved. So I look for big things out of Model, and like I say, for me, the most important thing for them this year is to keep moving forward with this program, and I would love to see them do that, because I really like the folks out there. I like Gordon Powers. I think he's a great guy, great coach, and it's just good to see one of our programs taking some steps forward after seeing some really tough years.
And it would be a huge thing for Model if they could get another winning season. I can't remember the last time these guys had back-to-back winning seasons. In fact, when I was doing research, I'm really not sure if they've had back-to-back playoff appearances in the last 30 years. So, I mean, and of course, that goes back to a time when you had to win the region game to get in the playoffs, so that may have been the problem. But, it'd be very interesting to see how they handle this year. Pepperell at Northwest Whitfield. Of course, last year the Dragons lost to Northwest 23-7. Pepperell finished the season 6-5, losing in the Class AA playoffs, their 4th straight first-round exit from the playoffs. Northwest finished 6-4, just missing the playoffs in Class 4A. For those unfamiliar with Northwest Whitfield, they installed kind of a fast break style offense a couple of years ago. That thing is churning along like there is no tomorrow. I can't remember who they blasted in their preseason game, but I think they scored pretty much every time they touched the ball. Pepperell, I saw them in the preseason game against Darlington, and yes, I know Pepperell fans will say, well, no score was kept. Well, I was on the sidelines and I kept scores, 24-7 in Darlington's favor, and Pepperell didn't score until late in the game. Again, don't read too much into preseason games. I did that a couple of years ago when Cedartown upset Pepperell, and then Pepperell had an 8-win season. So, it's tough for me right now, because with Pepperell, I don't see a great offensive identity. Pepperell's always had the big bruising tailback who can give them 25, 30 carries a game, gain around 200 yards. I don't know for sure who that's going to be for Pepperell. I'm not so sure. I saw the quarterbacks play. Good things from both of them. I couldn't get any feel for the wide receivers, because I think Darlington caught almost as many passes as Pepperell's wide receivers did. 2 or 3 interceptions in the preseason. On defense, I don't know who their playmakers are going to be. So I look at Pepperell. Pepperell's got size. They always have size. My question for them is, their offense is really going to have to get better fast. I think the defense will be okay. Against a team like Northwest Whitfield that is going to score points, I think Pepperell's going to be, unfortunately, in over their heads, because they can't get in a track meet with Northwest Whitfield. If they can hold the Bruins to 14 or 20 points, they've got a chance, but I think Northwest is going to score more than that. Northwest wins this game. Matt?
I agree with you. I think Northwest is going to win this game. You know, Pepperell really struggled out of the gate last year. They lost their first few games of the season. They turned it around and ended up with another pretty successful season under Jeff Shiflett, and he's had successful years ever since taking over for Lynn Honeycutt. So I don't see any reason why that's going to change a whole lot, because one of the benefits that Pepperell's had over the years is their numbers are just crazy big. I mean, they have a lot of kids that they dress out for the team, and they have that again this year. But it's like you said, who are the playmakers? You know, usually coming into the season, I can name 4 or 5 players that I think will be impact players for this team. And this year, I think we're going to be getting to know this team as they go along, because they lost a lot of kids. They're going to have a new quarterback. I think that even they would tell you that they're going to be finding their identity. And so it's, again, it's one of those good situations where at least your first few games, while you're trying to find yourself, they don't matter that much because they're non-region games. And so unless you're like a Rome High, where every game you play is a region game, or Darlington, where you have the power ranking situation, you know, they don't matter that much except for in terms of getting better and trying to improve. So I think Pepperell will improve, but I think it's going to be slow going in the beginning while they try to find that identity. So I'm going to go with Northwest Whitfield in this game.
Definitely, and I agree with you on that one. I just think it's going to be too much for Pepperell to handle. Speaking of a team that we do know who has playmakers, Myron Washington, All-State nomination at running back to start the season for Rome. They're going to be hosting South Paulding in the friendly confines of Barron Stadium. Last year, Rome beat South Paulding 34-15 to open the season. I covered that game, and Rome really took advantage and kind of ran past South Paulding. South Paulding made a couple mistakes. Rome made them pay. But one thing about South Paulding, they finished the season 6-4 last year, barely missing the playoffs in 5-5A. The reason they missed the playoffs, Matt? They lost to Rome in the first game of the season. When you play a full region schedule, every game means that much more. Every loss hurts more. Every win, well, means a lot more. Rome has 18 seniors coming back on there for them. Last year they finished 8-3, losing in the first round of the 5A playoffs to eventual state champion Gainesville. The big question I have with Rome is the separation between East Paulding, Allatoona, and Rome. And we won't, 3 weeks from now, we'll find out, because Allatoona is coming to Rome. Everybody around the Rome program is really pumped this year. I'm worried about the quarterback play. Tucker chose not to come back. He's got baseball in his future, so new quarterback. I mean, the running game's going to be there. The thing I've always said about Rome, 3 questions for me. Can they throw the ball and catch the ball? Can they get defenses out of putting 9 guys in the box? Can their defense be better than it was last year, where they allowed a lot more points than a typical Rome defense does? And what's their special team situation as far as kicking goes? I mean, punt returns, kickoff returns, no problem. They've got kids coming out of their ears that can take it deep, but I'll be very interested to see. I think this game could be a lot closer than a lot of people think. I think South Paulding, they have a new head coach. Unfortunately, he's undergoing some procedures to remove a tumor and will not be on the sidelines for a couple of weeks. Don't know if that will affect the team or not. What I will say here is I think Rome's going to get the win. They need to get the win. You can't lose this early in the region play, but it might be a lot closer than some people think. Matt, what do you think?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the passing game, because when you get in this classification, you got to be able to throw the ball. And I'm at a disadvantage in looking at these Rome games because I don't ever get the opportunity to see them play. I get to read them about in the newspaper, but you don't really get a good feel for a team until you actually see what they're doing on the field. But I'm with you on that. I mean, you know, one of the games I think about last year was watching Ridgeland play Sandy Creek in the finals there at the Dome. And they were a good team, run-based team, hard-nosed. But when they come up against a team like Sandy Creek that has all kind of things, all kind of weapons on the field that they can do on offense, and be able to pass the ball, that just opens up the field for them.
Certainly.
And so for a team to have success, particularly when you get towards the end of the season, if you make the playoffs, you're going to have to be able to do that. So from my standpoint, I'd like to see Rome really try to implement that right out of the gate and try to hone those skills and take them with them throughout the season. But as you mentioned, you don't have a whole lot of time to play around and try to improve. You got to be good right out of the gate. So I'm going to go with Rome in this game. I think they're going to be a powerful team this year, but a lot of it's going to hinge on how they're able to move that offense forward and vary things.
Well, and one of the big things about it, another reason a lot of people are excited for Rome this year, unless I'm badly mistaken, Allatoona, East Paulding, and North Paulding, arguably the 3 other best teams in their region, all have to come to Barron Stadium this year. That being said, I don't know if Rome has ever beaten Allatoona. They've lost 5 straight to East Paulding. And while they did beat North Paulding in overtime last year, North Paulding actually won a playoff game, something Rome hasn't done since 2009. So not to knock Rome, but I think it'll be a very interesting season with Rome. I really hope everybody's right, and this is a good year for Rome. But like I said, defense got to get better, got to find the passing game. One last game to talk about. New Creation Christian at Unity Christian, the second week of play in the ICSGA, the Independent Christian Schools of Georgia and Alabama, for those playing along at home. Last year, Unity lost to New Creation 21-0. Now, late in the third quarter, it was 0-0. Unity made 3 mistakes that turned into 3 touchdowns. New Creation lost last week to Loganville 21-13. Unity rallied on the road in Columbus, Georgia to beat Calvary Christian 36-35 last week. Last year, Unity lost in the first round of the ICSGA playoffs. The key thing for me in this is Unity got down by a couple of touchdowns last week on the road, first game. In past years, that meant they would lose.
Yeah.
This bunch, this is an interesting bunch because it looks like they have playmakers. When Unity Christian has playmakers, they make runs. Now, we saw it a couple of years ago. They had 4 or 5 playmakers. Even though they had a losing streak in the middle of the season, they got to the state finals and won. Yes, they had to give it back for the ineligible players. I have to throw that in there. That's life. But when Unity has playmakers, they can do well. I think they have those playmakers this year. I think Unity's going to start the season 2-0.
I personally think this could be the best team that Unity's had, to be honest with you. However, there is one problem with this team, and I sat down with Joe Curtis for about 30 minutes about a week ago, and he was really apprehensive about the progress that they'd made on defense. Well, you look at last week's game. Yep. They scored 36 points, but they gave up 35. And so even though I know he had to be excited about them pulling through and getting the win, he had to continue to be very concerned about the fact that his defense wasn't able to perform.
Now, wait a second. You said this is the best team Unity ever had. The one that won the state title had a good defense.
Well, I should say offensively.
Okay.
And I think that maybe in terms of specific individuals, maybe not, because Hoskins was a tremendous running back, and he was also great on defense.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they have a player that's better than he was.
Yeah.
But I think as a whole, I think that they've got a couple of wide receivers that are about 6'4" that can catch the ball. They've got, and that are pretty athletic. They've got a running back that's put on some weight during the offseason. He's going to be a lot more powerful. Anderson Krieger, who is their quarterback, he's really progressed from what I hear. And as you look at the statistics from last week's game, one thing held true from what Joe Curtis told me was that they were going to air the ball out a little bit more and pass more. And I think that makes an impact on every offense if they're able to do that, because it spreads the field and it makes the defense really have to work overtime, try to figure out what they're going to be doing, because they've got so many different weapons. And I think that's one thing that Unity has this year that they haven't had in Access in the last couple of years. But I would hate, to feel like their defense is going to make them have to get out there and score 40 points just to win a football game.
Yeah.
If their defense gets better as the season goes on, then what I said could hold true, that this could be the best team that they've had. And I think they're moving forward. And unless I'm badly mistaken, this is going to be the last season that they play in the ICSGA. And so they're going to I'm not saying they're going to GHSA. That's a few years down the road. I know that's their goal. They got to get the numbers up at the school before they can do that. But I believe they're going to be moving to a GISA, type situation next year.
GISA?
I believe that is what I've been told.
Wow.
Maybe I should fact check before I make.
It could be a lot of gas money, considering I think the nearest GISA team is probably 3 hours away.
Like Macon, something like that.
Yeah, just about. Well, that would be interesting.
So we'll see what happens, but this is a program that's very ambitious, and I think they make some strides. And one of the things that Joe Curtis was telling me about, their center's like 300 pounds. They got one guy on their line that's 6'8" and like 280 pounds.
Yep.
They're very big, and you would not, at least in my mind with my limited knowledge of ICSGA, I just wouldn't expect that a line for these size school would be able to get players that big on their line like Unity has. Those guys are going to be intimidating to some of these teams.
Well, I mean, when I was entering the rosters, and Unity is one of the few football teams that we actually had the heights and weights on the guys. I was entering them into PrepCentralOnline.com for all of our football teams have rosters online. I noticed that they had a 6'8". They had a couple of kids that were huge, and I'm like, wow, where'd those guys come from? But you got that kind of size in ICSGA. If those kids can play, it's going to help you out tremendously. And we've talked about them all. Those are our games this Friday night. We're going to have, as always, come to PrepCentralOnline.com, live updated scoreboards throughout the evening, later in the evening, articles from the games, photos, videos from a couple of games, and we'll shut it all down late in the evening with Gridiron Central, as we'll do the Gridiron Central Scoreboard Show brought to you by Georgia Northwestern Technical College. We'll give you the highlights of the games we cover, plus we'll give all the ins and outs of who won, who lost, why it happened, and what makes that significant. For Kevin Myrick, Matt Davis, gotta do the fist bump, I'm Jim Alred saying we'll see you on the sidelines on Friday night.